The night Margaret Williams called her 3 successful children and begged just one of them to let her sleep in their home, she wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for a nurse. She was asking for a place to die without being alone. All 3 gave her excuses. One said his business needed him. Another said his wife wouldn't allow it. The third said her children already needed too much attention. So Margaret went back to the little house where she had buried her husband, swallowed her pain, and accepted that her own children had no room for her in their lives. But what those 3 children didn't know was that their dying mother's name was sitting on a fortune worth millions of dollars. And when the truth finally came out, they would discover something far more painful than losing an inheritance. They had already lost their mother long before she stopped loving them. Then immediately, before we get into this heartbreaking story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what happens at the end is something none of Margaret's children ever saw coming. And if you believe children should never abandon the parents who sacrificed everything for them, stay with me until the very end. Margaret Williams woke up at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning with a sharp pain in her chest. She gasped. For a few seconds, she couldn't move. Her eyes opened wide as she stared into the darkness surrounding her bedroom. The pain came again, sharp, sudden, terrifying. Margaret slowly placed one hand over her chest and tried to catch her breath. Her heart was racing. She looked toward the other side of the bed, empty. It had been empty for years, but on nights like this, she still instinctively looked there, as if Robert might somehow still be lying beside her. As if she could turn toward him and whisper, "Robert, I'm scared." But there was no Robert. There was only silence and the darkness. Margaret swallowed hard. She reached for the lamp beside her bed and turned it on. The soft yellow light filled the room, revealing the familiar surroundings she had lived in for decades. The old wooden dresser, the family photographs, the small clock on the nightstand, and the framed picture of her late husband sitting beside a photograph of their 4 children, Michael, Daniel, Vanessa, and Lily. Margaret looked at the photographs. Her eyes became wet. She had spent her entire life believing that no matter what happened, her children would always be there for her. After all, she had been there for them, every single time. She had stayed awake when they were sick. She had gone without food so they could eat. She had worked when she was exhausted. She had sacrificed things she wanted so her children could have things they needed. She had watched them grow. She had watched them graduate. She had watched them get married. She had watched them build lives of their own. And now, at 72 years old, she had become the one who needed someone. The thought frightened her more than the pain in her chest. Margaret slowly reached for her phone. Her hand trembled. She stared at the screen. There was one name she wanted to call first. Michael, her oldest child. The successful one. The responsible one. The one she had always believed would protect the family. Margaret hesitated. Her thumb hovered over his name. She knew it was 2 in the morning. She knew he might be asleep. But deep down, she also knew something else. Michael had been avoiding her calls. Not always, not openly, but slowly. The calls that used to last 20 minutes had become 5 minutes, then 2. Then unanswered. Margaret had noticed. Of course she had noticed. A mother always notices, but she refused to believe what her heart was telling her. She told herself Michael was busy. He had a business, a wife, children, responsibilities. He was simply busy. That's all. Margaret pressed the call button. 1 ring, 2, 3. She waited. Nothing. The call ended. Margaret stared at the screen. She tried again. 1 ring, 2, 3. No answer. She swallowed. Then she tried a 3rd time. Still nothing. Margaret slowly lowered the phone. "He's probably busy," she whispered to herself. She said it again. "He's probably busy," but her voice didn't sound convinced. She looked at her husband's photograph. "I know he's busy," she whispered. She smiled sadly. "I know," but deep down, Margaret knew she was lying to herself. Michael wasn't always this busy. Not before. Something had changed. Or perhaps Margaret had simply become something she never wanted to admit. A burden. She shook the thought away. "No," she whispered. "He wouldn't think that." She moved to the next name, Daniel, her 2nd son. Daniel had his own business. A growing restaurant chain, a wife, children, a busy life. Margaret called him. No answer. She waited, then called again. Still nothing. Margaret sighed. Okay. She looked at the clock. 2:07 a.m. Her chest still hurt. She was still scared. But she didn't want to keep calling her children. She didn't want to be that mother. The mother who called too much. The mother who needed too much. The mother who interrupted their lives. So she moved to the next name, Vanessa, her daughter. Margaret hesitated longer this time, then pressed call. It rang and rang and rang. No answer. Margaret tried again. Nothing. She stared at her daughter's name on the screen. Then she slowly lowered the phone. 3 children, 3 unanswered calls. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them quickly. No, she whispered. I won't cry. She didn't want to cry. Not tonight. But then she looked at the last name on her screen. Lily, her youngest. Margaret's heart tightened. She didn't want to call her. Lily was only 24. She was still in school. She was struggling. She worked 2 jobs just to keep herself going. And somehow, despite everything, Lily still found time to check on her mother. Margaret knew Lily was probably awake, studying, trying to build a future. She didn't want to interrupt her. She didn't want Lily worrying about her. Margaret stared at the phone. Then another sharp pain shot through her chest. She gasped. That was it. She had no choice. With trembling fingers, she pressed Lily's name. The phone rang. Once. Lily answered. Hi, Mommy. Margaret closed her eyes. Just hearing her daughter's voice made something inside her break. Hello, baby. Lily immediately noticed something was wrong. Mommy? I'm fine. Mommy, what's wrong? Nothing. Mommy. Margaret was silent. Lily sat up in bed. She knew her mother. She knew that if Margaret was calling her at 2 in the morning, something wasn't right. Tell me what's wrong. Margaret tried to sound normal. Her voice cracked. I just feel lonely. Lily's expression changed. Are you feeling sick again? Margaret hesitated. The episode started again. Lily immediately got out of bed. What? I'm okay, baby. No, you're not. I'm fine. Mommy, I'm coming. Margaret shook her head even though Lily couldn't see her. No, baby. Don't come. I'm coming. Lily, it's 2 in the morning. I know. You have school tomorrow. I know. You're tired. I know. You have work. I know, Mommy. Margaret's voice became softer. Please, just stay there. There was silence for a moment. Then Lily said something that Margaret would remember for the rest of her life. No, Mommy. I'll come. Margaret closed her eyes. Baby, I love you. Margaret's tears finally fell. I love you too. I'm coming. And Lily meant it. Within minutes, she was dressed. She grabbed her bag. She didn't even think about how tired she was. She didn't think about the lecture she had the next morning. She didn't think about the job she had to report to. She only thought about her mother. Before leaving, she called Margaret. Mommy, I'm here. I'm on my way. Be careful. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Margaret smiled. For the first time that night, she felt something other than fear. She felt loved. She sat quietly on the edge of her bed, and for the first time in a very long time, she realized something. Maybe she wasn't completely alone. Maybe, despite everything she had sacrificed, at least one of her children still needed her. At least one still loved her. At 2:25 a.m., Lily arrived. She rushed into the house and went straight to her mother. Mommy, Margaret looked at her. My baby. Lily knelt beside her. Let's go to the hospital. I'll be fine. No arguments. Margaret smiled weakly. You sound like your father. Lily smiled. Then let's go. They left together. At the hospital, doctors immediately attended to Margaret. They ran several tests, checked her heart, checked her blood pressure, ran blood work, asked her questions. Lily stayed beside her the entire time. She held her mother's hand. She watched the doctors move in and out. She answered questions when Margaret became too tired. Hours passed. Eventually, the doctor came back. Your mother's condition is stable. Lily released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Thank God. The doctor gave them instructions and medication. Margaret would need more care, more monitoring, and someone needed to be around her. That last part terrified Lily, because she already knew what the problem was. She wasn't supposed to be the only person doing this. Her mother had 3 other adult children, 3, and all 3 were in a much better position than she was. Lily stepped outside the hospital room. She walked down the hallway. Then she found an empty bench. She sat, and finally, she broke down. She covered her face with both hands and cried. But she wasn't crying because she hated taking care of her mother. She wasn't crying because Margaret was a burden. She was crying because she was 24 years old. She was still trying to figure out her own life. She was studying, working 2 jobs, trying to pay her bills, trying to survive, and somehow she had become responsible for an elderly mother who needed constant care. What hurt most wasn't even the responsibility. It was knowing that she wasn't supposed to be carrying it alone. Her brothers were doing well. Her sister was doing well. They had homes, businesses, families, money, resources, yet somehow, Lily was the one sitting in a hospital at 3 in the morning. She wiped her tears. Then she picked up her phone. She called Michael. This time, he answered. "Hello? Michael, what happened? Mom had another episode." "What do you mean?" "We had to bring her to the hospital." Michael became quiet. "Is she okay?" "She's stable." "Okay." Lily took a breath. "Michael, I need you to help me." "I'm listening." "She can't keep staying alone." "I know. She needs someone around her." "I'll send some money." "Michael, that's not what I'm asking." Silence. "I need you to take her." "What?" "Let her stay with you for a while." "Lily, please." "I can't." "Why?" "I'm busy." "Michael, she's our mother." "I know that." "Then why can't you help?" "Lily, I have a family too." "And I don't?" Michael became irritated. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "I have responsibilities. So do I." Lily's voice cracked. "But I'm still here." Silence. Michael didn't answer. Lily wiped her face. "Please, Michael. I'll send you some money." "I don't need your money." "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to be her son." The line went silent. Then Michael said quietly, "I can't do this right now." And the call ended. Lily stared at the phone. She called Daniel. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. Then Vanessa. No answer. Again. Nothing. Lily looked down at the floor, and something inside her finally collapsed. She cried harder. Not because she wanted sympathy, not because she wanted money, but because she suddenly understood that her siblings had chosen their own lives over their mother, and she was the only one left. The next morning, Lily brought Margaret home. Margaret was exhausted. Lily helped her into bed. "Sleep, Mommy." Margaret smiled weakly. "Thank you, baby." Lily kissed her forehead. "I love you." "I love you too." Margaret closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Lily stood in the doorway watching her. For a moment, everything was peaceful. She quietly closed the door. Then she went to school. That evening, Lily returned home exhausted. She had spent the entire day at school after barely sleeping the night before. She had another job waiting for her the following morning. But when she walked through the door, she saw her mother slowly walking down the hallway. "Mommy?" Margaret didn't answer. She was standing in front of an old portrait, her husband's portrait, Robert. Margaret slowly lifted her hand and touched the photograph. Her fingers trembled. "Oh, Robert," her voice broke. "I miss you." She stood there quietly. "I am so lonely." Her eyes filled with tears. "You left me with our children?" She smiled sadly. "But look at me now." Margaret touched the frame. "I don't know what happened." She lowered her head. "3 of them have their own lives." Her voice became softer. "And Lily," she paused. "That little girl is carrying everything." Margaret wiped her eyes. "I don't know how she does it." She looked at Robert's photograph again. "I wish you were here." Then, as her fingers moved along the edge of the portrait, she felt something. Margaret stopped. She touched the frame again. Something was behind it. She frowned. Slowly, she moved the portrait away from the wall. And there, hidden behind it, was a small envelope. Margaret stared at it. Her heart began beating faster. "What is this?" She carefully pulled the envelope from behind the portrait. It looked old, very old. Her husband's name was written across the front. Margaret's hands began to tremble. Robert had never mentioned this. She looked toward the bedroom, then back at the envelope. For several seconds, she simply stood there, wondering, what could possibly be inside? Why had Robert hidden it? And why had he placed it behind their wedding portrait? Margaret slowly walked into her bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed, placed the envelope in her lap, and stared at it. She took a deep breath, then carefully opened it. And what Margaret found inside would change the lives of all 4 of her children forever. Margaret Williams did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, the brown envelope resting on her lap like something alive. Her hands trembled as she stared at her name written across the front. Margaret Williams, Robert's handwriting. Neat, certain, final. The same handwriting he had used for grocery lists, school notes, and birthday cards. But this felt different, heavier, like it had been waiting for her for years. From the hallway, the house was silent. Lily had finally fallen asleep on the couch downstairs, exhausted from worry and lack of rest. Margaret should have called her, should have told her what she had found, but she didn't. Because something inside her whispered that this envelope was not meant to be opened casually. It was meant for a moment like this, a moment alone, a moment of truth. Margaret slowly broke the seal. The paper made a soft tearing sound that felt too loud in the quiet house. Inside was a stack of documents. Neatly arranged, carefully preserved. At the top was a letter, folded once, addressed to her. Her breath caught. She opened it and began to read. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. I am sorry for the weight I am about to place on your shoulders. But I had no other choice. There are things I could not tell you while I was alive, not because I did not trust you, but because I was afraid of what it would do to you and to our children. Margaret stopped reading for a moment. Her chest tightened. She pressed a hand against it, as if trying to steady her heartbeat. Then she continued. I built something years ago, something I never told you about. It started as a small investment. Then it grew, and grew, and grew beyond anything I ever imagined. I did it quietly, carefully, for them, for our children, for their future. But I made a mistake. A very big mistake. I never told them the value of what I built, and I never told them how to protect it. Margaret's fingers tightened around the paper. Her eyes moved faster now. The assets I leave behind are worth more than you can imagine. Properties, shares, businesses, accounts, all legally yours. But there is a condition I placed before my death, because I knew our children. I knew how the world changes people, and I knew what money can do to families who are not ready for it. Margaret paused again. Her hands were shaking harder now. She looked up at the dark room. Robert, what did you do? Then she read on. The inheritance is divided into 4 equal parts, but none of the children can access it immediately. Not Michael, not Daniel, not Vanessa, not even Lily. They must first meet the conditions I set. Only then will the truth be revealed to them. And only then will they understand what they almost lost. Margaret's breath became uneven. She reached for the next document. A list, names, figures, properties, bank accounts. Her eyes widened slowly. This was not just money. This was generational wealth. The kind of wealth that changed entire futures. And her children had no idea. None of them. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Then she whispered into the silence. Robert, why didn't you tell me? But there was no answer. Only the ticking clock. Downstairs, Lily shifted in her sleep, unaware that everything in her life was about to change. Upstairs, Margaret continued reading. The conditions were written clearly. Each child had a requirement, a responsibility, a test. Michael had to return to the family business he abandoned years ago. Daniel had to stabilize the failing restaurant chain he once refused to expand. Vanessa had to take over the legal management of the estate. And Lily, Margaret stopped. Her eyes softened. Lily's condition was different. Not about money, not about business, but about care. She was to remain the primary caregiver for Margaret, until Margaret herself decided otherwise. Margaret closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. Even now, she whispered, you still saw her. Robert had always known. Lily was the one who stayed, the one who cared, the one who never left. But then Margaret saw the final page, a warning. Her heart sank as she read it. If the children reject these conditions, if they refuse responsibility, if they abandon what I have built, then everything will be donated to a foundation. Not a single cent will go to them. Because I did not build this empire for greed. I built it for family. And if they cannot act like one, then they will receive nothing. Margaret dropped the letter onto her lap. Her mind spun. Her husband had created a fortune that could solve every problem her children had ever faced. And yet, they had been too busy to answer her calls, too busy to sit with her, too busy to notice her illness. She looked toward the stairs, toward Lily, her only child who still came, her only child who still stayed. And for the first time that night, Margaret understood something painful. Robert had not just left her an inheritance, he had left her a test of family, a test of love, a test of loyalty. The next morning came too quickly. Lily woke up on the couch, stretching her stiff arms. "Mom?" No answer. She stood up quickly. "Mom?" She rushed upstairs. The bedroom door was open. Margaret was sitting on the bed, still holding the envelope. Her face looked different, not sick. Not tired, but changed. Lily froze. "Mom, what is that?" Margaret looked at her daughter, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Your father left us something." Lily frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret held up the papers. "Something I think will destroy this family." She paused. "Or save it." Lily stepped closer. "Mom, what is it?" Margaret looked at her youngest daughter, the only one who had not walked away, the only one who had answered the phone, the only one who had come at 2:17 in the morning, and she said quietly, "Your father was a very rich man, Lily." Lily blinked. "What?" Margaret's voice broke slightly. "And your brothers and sister have no idea." Silence filled the room, heavy, uncomfortable, life-changing. Lily slowly sat down. "Mom?" Margaret nodded. "Yes." Lily swallowed. "How rich?" Margaret looked at the papers again, then back at her daughter, and answered in a whisper that changed everything. "More than we could ever spend in 10 lifetimes." Downstairs, Lily's phone began to ring. Unknown number, then another, and another. Upstairs, Margaret closed the envelope, because she already knew what was coming next. The children who had ignored their mother were about to discover they had been ignoring a fortune, and the first call they would make now would not be out of love, but out of regret and greed. The unknown number continued ringing. Lily stared at her phone. She didn't recognize it. She let it ring. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, it rang again. Same number. Lily frowned. "Mom?" Margaret looked at her. "Don't answer it." "Why?" "I don't know who it is." The phone stopped again. Then a message appeared. "Please call me back. This is urgent." Lily looked at her mother. "Who could this be?" Margaret shook her head. "I don't know." But deep down, something had already begun to trouble her. The lawyer's letter, the documents, the conditions, the fortune, and the warning her husband had written before his death. Margaret suddenly understood why Robert had hidden everything. Money didn't just reveal what people wanted. Sometimes it revealed who they really were, and Margaret was about to find out exactly who her children had become. That afternoon, Margaret asked Lily to keep everything they had found a secret. "Don't tell your brothers." Lily looked confused. "Why?" "Because I want to know something first." "What?" Margaret looked out through the window. "I want to know whether they will come because they love me." She paused. "Or because they hear there is something to gain." Lily's expression changed. "Mom, you don't think they'd do that?" Margaret gave her a sad smile. "I didn't think they'd abandon me either." Lily had no answer. That sentence stayed with her. 3 days passed, nothing happened. Michael didn't call. Daniel didn't call. Vanessa didn't call. And for the first time, Margaret felt strangely calm. She continued taking her medication. She sat in the garden. She watched Lily leave for school each morning and return exhausted in the evening. She listened to her daughter complain about assignments. She watched her fall asleep over her textbooks. And Margaret began to realize something. Maybe she had spent too many years waiting for people who had already stopped coming. Maybe she needed to stop waiting. Maybe she needed to accept that Lily was the child who had truly stayed. But then, on the fourth morning, everything changed. Margaret was sitting at the kitchen table when her phone rang. Michael. She stared at his name. Lily was washing dishes. Mom? Margaret didn't answer. The phone continued ringing. Finally, she picked it up. Hello? Mom? Michael's voice sounded unusually warm. Margaret frowned. Michael? How are you? I'm fine. How are you really? Margaret sat back. I'm okay. Have you been taking your medication? Yes. Are you eating? Yes. Michael laughed softly. Good. Good. Margaret listened. Something felt different. Michael had never asked these questions before. Not like this. Not with this much enthusiasm. Is something wrong? She asked. No. A pause. I just realized I've been neglecting you. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. Have you? Mom, I'm serious. I know. I should have been there. Margaret didn't respond. Michael continued. I was thinking, yes, maybe you should come stay with us. Margaret's fingers tightened around the phone. She looked at Lily. Lily looked back at her. When? Margaret asked. Whenever you're ready. Margaret remained silent. Michael laughed nervously. You know you have a room here. Do I? Of course. Margaret remembered the last time she had asked. The excuses, the hesitation. The conversation that had ended with Michael telling her that his wife wasn't comfortable having a sick person in the house. Now suddenly, she had a room. I'll think about it, Margaret said. Please do. I will. Love you, Mom. Margaret froze. Michael hadn't said those words in months. I love you too. The call ended. Lily slowly dried her hands. That was strange. Margaret nodded. Very. An hour later, Daniel called. His conversation was almost identical. Mom, I feel terrible. I understand. I've been so caught up with the restaurants. I know. I should have made more time for you. Margaret listened. Then Daniel said, Actually, I was thinking about something. What? You should come live with me. Margaret closed her eyes. 2 children. 2 invitations. Both arriving within hours. After months of silence, she knew it wasn't a coincidence. That's kind of you, she said. You're my mother, Margaret almost laughed. Instead, she said, I'll think about it. Daniel hesitated. Mom? Yes? There's something else I wanted to ask. Margaret waited. Did Dad leave any important documents? Her heart stopped. For a second, she couldn't speak. What kind of documents? I don't know. Financial documents? Investments? Property papers? Anything like that. Margaret looked toward Lily. Lily had stopped moving. Why are you asking? Daniel laughed. No reason. I'm just trying to organize some family matters. Family matters? Yes. Margaret's voice became colder. I see. Mom, don't misunderstand me. I haven't misunderstood anything. Okay, I'll speak with you later. She ended the call. Lily walked toward her. Mom. Margaret put the phone down. He's heard something. That evening, Vanessa arrived at the house, without calling. Without warning, she knocked on the door carrying a large bouquet of flowers and 2 bags of expensive groceries. Lily opened the door. Vanessa? Vanessa smiled. Hi, sweetheart. Lily stepped aside. Come in. Vanessa walked into the living room. Mom? Margaret looked up from her chair. Vanessa? I missed you. Vanessa walked over and hugged her. Margaret allowed it, but she didn't hug her back immediately. Vanessa pulled away. You look beautiful. I'm sick, Vanessa. I know, but you haven't visited me in months. Vanessa's smile faded. I know. Why are you here? Vanessa looked hurt. Because you're my mother. Margaret nodded. That's interesting. Mom, I asked you for help. I know. I asked to stay with you. I know. You said no. I was overwhelmed. Margaret looked at her. And now? Vanessa sat beside her. Now I've realized that family comes first. Margaret stared at her daughter. Then Vanessa reached into her purse. She pulled out a small envelope. I brought you something. Margaret opened it. Money. More than Vanessa had ever given her before. Margaret looked at the cash. What's this? Just something to help. Why? Because I want to. Margaret slowly closed the envelope. "Thank you," Vanessa smiled. Then she asked, "Mom, yes? Did Dad leave anything behind?" Margaret's face became expressionless. "What do you mean?" "I heard there might be some old investments." Margaret stared at her. "Who told you?" Vanessa hesitated. "No one." "Then why are you asking?" "I was just curious." Margaret nodded slowly. "Of course." Vanessa smiled. But Margaret could see something behind her eyes. Expectation. That night, Margaret sat alone in her bedroom. The 3 children had suddenly returned. Michael called twice. Daniel called 3 times. Vanessa sent messages every few hours. They wanted to know how she was feeling. They wanted to know what she needed. They wanted to know about their father. And Margaret finally understood. They didn't know everything, but someone had told them something. Maybe a rumor, maybe a lawyer. Maybe they had discovered an old document. Whatever it was, they were coming back. Margaret opened Robert's letter again. She reread the final paragraph. "If they cannot act like family, then they will receive nothing." Margaret whispered, "Robert?" She looked at his photograph. "I think I understand now." Her husband had known. He had known that one day money might test their children. He had known that wealth could turn love into competition. He had known that people could suddenly become affectionate when there was something to gain. But Robert had left Margaret with another responsibility, a decision, and she knew exactly what she had to do. The next morning, Margaret called the lawyer. "Mr. Harris? Mrs. Williams, I need to ask you something." "Of course. How much do my children know?" There was silence. "About the inheritance?" "Yes. As far as I know, nothing." "Then why are they suddenly asking questions?" The lawyer sighed. "I was afraid this might happen." "What?" "Someone may have discovered that your husband had substantial assets." Margaret's heart sank. "Who?" "We don't know." "Can they access anything?" "No." "Can they take anything?" "Absolutely not." Margaret exhaled. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in her heart since the night she opened the envelope. "Mr. Harris?" "Yes?" "What happens if I decide none of my children deserve this money?" The lawyer paused. "Mrs. Williams, legally, you can change the estate arrangements within the terms of the trust. And if I want the money to go somewhere else? That is possible." Margaret looked at Robert's photograph. "Somewhere where it can actually help people." "Yes." She nodded. "Then prepare the documents." "For what?" "A new plan." That evening, Lily came home from work exhausted. She dropped her bag beside the door. "Mom?" Margaret was waiting in the living room. "How was school?" "Tiring." "Did you eat?" "A little." Margaret smiled. "Come sit with me." Lily sat down. Margaret reached for her hand. "I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Whatever happens next." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You don't become bitter." Lily frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your brothers and sister may say things. They already have. They may hurt you. They already have." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "But don't let them change your heart." Lily stared at her mother. "Mom, what are you planning?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Something your father should have done a long time ago." "What?" "Protect the people who deserve to be protected." Lily didn't understand. Not yet. But she would. Because the following week, Margaret invited all 4 of her children to dinner. Michael came. Daniel came. Vanessa came. And Lily sat quietly beside her mother. The 3 older siblings arrived dressed in their finest clothes. They brought gifts, they brought smiles, they brought apologies, and they brought questions. But none of them knew that beneath the table, Margaret's hand was resting on a folder. Inside that folder was the beginning of a decision that would change their lives forever. Michael raised his glass. "To family." Daniel smiled. "To Mom." Vanessa reached for Margaret's hand. "We're going to make sure you're never alone again." Margaret looked at the 3 of them. Then she smiled. A quiet, almost heartbreaking smile, because she knew something they didn't. For months, she had begged them to make room for her in their lives. Now they were fighting to make room in hers. And this time, Margaret wasn't going to beg. She was going to watch. She wanted to know how much of their sudden love would remain when they discovered exactly what their father had left behind. Because before Margaret revealed the number, she wanted them to reveal themselves. And that dinner was only the beginning. The dinner was supposed to be about family. At least, that was what Michael, Daniel, and Vanessa believed. Margaret knew better. She sat at the head of the table, watching her 3 older children talk, as though nothing had changed. Michael had brought an expensive bottle of wine. Daniel had brought pastries from one of his restaurants. Vanessa had brought a silk robe and slippers. All of it looked thoughtful. All of it looked rehearsed. Margaret's mind drifted, uninvited, to the months she had spent alone, calling, waiting, and being told no. She remembered asking Michael if she could stay with him. She remembered Daniel saying his life was too complicated. She remembered Vanessa mentioning her husband wouldn't approve, and she remembered Lily arriving at 2 in the morning without hesitation or questions. Now they were all here, smiling, performing. Michael lifted his glass. "I think we should make a fresh start." Margaret looked at him. "A fresh start?" Daniel nodded. "We've all made mistakes." Vanessa reached across the table and touched Margaret's hand. "And we're sorry." Margaret didn't move her hand away. "Thank you." Michael leaned forward. "I've been thinking about the future." "So have I," Margaret said evenly. "We should talk about the family estate." Lily looked up. Margaret noticed immediately. There it was. Michael had barely finished his sentence. Margaret folded her hands. "What about it?" Michael cleared his throat. "Dad left the house." "Yes. And there are other assets." "Are there?" Margaret asked. Michael hesitated. "I mean, there must be." Daniel stepped in quickly. "We're not trying to pressure you." "Of course not," Margaret said. "We just want everything organized," he added. Vanessa nodded. "For the family." Margaret repeated the word quietly. "The family." Lily lowered her gaze. She didn't need to speak for Margaret to understand what she was thinking. Where had this concern been before? When she was sick? When she needed help? When she could barely stand? Margaret said nothing. She took a sip of water. "Don't worry," she said. The tension eased slightly. "I'll take care of everything." Michael smiled. "Good. That's all we want," Daniel said. Margaret looked at them. "No." The word cut through the room. The smiles faded. "That's not all you want." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret leaned back. "You want to know what your father left behind." Silence followed. Michael gave a short, uneasy laugh. "Mom, we're just concerned about you." "I know," she said. Vanessa shifted in her seat. "Why would you think it's about money?" "Because you didn't ask about my health," Margaret said. Vanessa froze. "You asked about the estate." No one responded. "You didn't ask if I was in pain," she continued. She looked at Michael. "You asked about documents." Then Daniel. "You asked about investments." The room tightened. Lily set her fork down. "For months, I called you because I needed help," Margaret said. Her voice wavered, but she continued. "You didn't come." Michael started to speak. "Mom, let me finish." He stopped. "I asked to stay with you." A pause. "You all said no." Vanessa looked down. "I asked for help." "You gave excuses," Margaret said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "And now," she continued, glancing at the gifts beside the table, "now that you think there may be money, you suddenly have time." Michael's expression hardened. "That's not fair." Margaret met his eyes. Neither was being left alone. Silence settled again. Lily's eyes filled, but she said nothing. Margaret wiped a tear from her cheek. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," she exhaled. "I need you to understand something." She looked at each of them. "Your father left me something." Michael leaned forward. "What?" "Something valuable." The room went still. "How valuable?" Daniel asked. Margaret gave a faint, controlled smile. "I haven't decided what to do with it." Michael frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't know if you'll receive it." Vanessa stiffened. "Mom!" Margaret stood. "That's enough for tonight." Michael stared at her. "You're not going to tell us?" "Not yet." After they left, Lily helped clear the table. They worked in silence for a while. Then Lily spoke. "You're really not telling them?" "No." "Why?" Margaret placed a plate in the sink. "Because I want to see what they do when they think something is at stake." "What if they get angry?" "They already were," Margaret said. "When I needed them." Lily looked down. "What if they stop coming?" Margaret gave a small, tired smile. "Then we'll know why they were coming." Lily hesitated. "This isn't fair to you." Margaret pulled her into a hug. I know. I just wish they understood. They will, Margaret said. How? People only understand value when they think it's gone. The next morning, the lawyer called. Mrs. Williams? Yes. The documents are ready. Good. There's something else. Margaret straightened. The trust includes an amendment your husband made before his death. What kind of amendment? The inheritance is not divided equally. Margaret frowned. I thought it was. That was the original plan. What changed? Your husband revised it 3 months before he died. Margaret's breath slowed. What did he change? He added a character clause. A what? A condition based on how the children treated you during your lifetime. Margaret went still. Toward me? Yes. How is that measured? Care, financial support, medical assistance, and time spent with you. Margaret stared ahead. Robert had planned this without telling her. So what does that mean? It means your children have already been evaluated. Margaret closed her eyes. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a test. And they had already begun failing it. That afternoon, Michael arrived unannounced. Margaret was in the garden. Mom, she looked up. Michael, can we talk? Of course. He sat across from her. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he exhaled. I know what you said last night. Margaret waited. I understand why you're upset. Do you? Yes. Good. He shifted uncomfortably. I want to fix things. How? I want you to move in with me. Margaret studied him. Why? Because you're my mother. Why now? I made mistakes, he said. Margaret leaned forward. What changed? He hesitated. Then he said it. I heard Dad left something substantial. The truth landed plainly. Margaret didn't react. So that's why you're here. No. Then why mention it? I want to understand what we're dealing with. We're family. Margaret nodded slowly. Family. She studied him. If your father had left nothing, Michael went quiet. Would you still want me to move in with you? He didn't answer. That silence answered for him. Margaret looked away. I thought so. Michael stood. That's not fair. Maybe not. I love you. I know. You have to believe that. I want to, she said. Then let me take care of you. Margaret shook her head. No. He stared at her. I'll stay here, she added. With Lily? Yes. His jaw tightened. She can't give you what I can. Margaret looked at him. She already has. He said nothing more. He left. Margaret watched him go. No tears came. Only clarity. That evening, Lily returned with groceries. She found Margaret at the table with the documents. Mom, come here. Lily sat. Margaret placed a page in front of her. Read it. Lily scanned it. Her expression changed. Mom, yes. This means they're being tested. And if they fail, everything goes to the foundation. And if you choose otherwise? Margaret looked at her. Then I choose. Lily swallowed. What about me? Margaret softened. You're not part of the test. Why? Because you've already shown me what matters. Lily's eyes filled. I didn't do anything special. That's exactly it. Margaret took her hand. You showed up. Lily looked down. You don't owe me anything. I know, Margaret said. And that's why you deserve everything. But Margaret wasn't finished. She needed to see how far her older children would go, so she made a decision. She would tell them the inheritance existed, but not how much. Not yet. Just enough to tempt them. Just enough to test them. She called Michael, then Daniel, then Vanessa. Come tomorrow evening. Why? Michael asked. Because I have something to tell you about your father's inheritance. She ended the call. 3 calls, 3 reactions, 1 final test. Tomorrow, she would place a number on the table and watch them decide what she was worth. The next evening, Margaret sat at the head of the dining table. Lily sat beside her. Across from them were Michael, Daniel, and Vanessa. For the first time in years, all 4 children were sitting together in the same room. But it didn't feel like a family dinner. It felt like a courtroom. Michael kept glancing at the folder beside Margaret. Daniel looked restless. Vanessa couldn't stop watching her mother's face. Finally, Michael spoke. Mom, you said you wanted to tell us about Dad's inheritance. Margaret nodded. I did. Daniel leaned forward. Is it significant? Margaret looked at him. Very. How significant? Margaret reached for the folder. Before opening it, she looked at her 3 older children. When I was sick, I asked each of you for help. Nobody spoke. I asked if I could stay in your homes. Michael lowered his eyes. I asked if you could help with my medical bills. Daniel swallowed. I asked you to visit me because I was lonely. Vanessa looked down. And every one of you had a reason you couldn't. Margaret opened the folder. Yet somehow, the moment you heard your father left something behind, you found time to come. Michael shook his head. Mom, that's not fair. Margaret looked at him. I've heard that before. Silence. She took out a document. Then another. Then another. Finally, she placed a single page on the table. You want to know what your father left? 3 pairs of eyes stared at the document. Margaret spoke quietly. $7 million. Nobody moved. Daniel blinked. How much? 7 million. Vanessa covered her mouth. Michael stared at the paper. 7 million? Margaret nodded. Yes. The room became completely silent. For several seconds, nobody knew what to say. Then Michael suddenly smiled. Oh, Mom? He stood and walked around the table. He hugged her. Margaret remained still. I knew Dad had something, he whispered. Daniel's face had already changed. So there are properties too? Margaret looked at him. There are investments. How many? Several. And the house. Still mine. Vanessa leaned forward. Mom, this could change everything. Margaret looked at her. It already has. Vanessa didn't notice the meaning behind the words. She smiled. We can finally make sure you're comfortable. Margaret looked at her. I was asking you to make me comfortable before you knew about the money. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Michael returned to his seat. So how is it divided? Margaret didn't answer. Mom? I haven't decided. Daniel frowned. But Dad had a will. He did. So shouldn't the money be divided according to his wishes? Margaret looked at him. Your father's wishes changed before he died. Daniel's expression tightened. What does that mean? It means the money doesn't automatically belong to you. Michael stared at her. But we're his children. Yes, and he built it for us. Margaret shook her head. No, the word was quiet, but it carried weight. He built it for the family. Michael looked confused. What's the difference? Margaret looked at Lily, then back at them. The family isn't simply people who share your blood. She paused. Family is who shows up when you're bleeding. No one spoke. Margaret continued. When I was sick, Lily showed up. When I couldn't walk, Lily held me. When I couldn't afford my medication, Lily worked. When I was afraid, Lily stayed awake with me. She looked at her older children. Where were you? Michael's eyes filled. Mom, where were you? He looked down. Daniel said quietly, We were busy. Margaret nodded. Exactly. Vanessa began crying. Mom, we made mistakes. Margaret looked at her. I know. We didn't realize how serious things were. You knew. Vanessa shook her head. No, you knew I was sick. Yes. You knew I needed help. Yes. You knew I asked to stay with you. Vanessa lowered her head. Yes. So you knew. Vanessa couldn't answer. Margaret turned to Michael. And you? Michael wiped his face. I'm sorry. Are you sorry because you abandoned me? He looked at her. Yes. Or because you discovered $7 million. Michael froze. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence answered for him. Daniel suddenly stood. Mom, whatever we did, we're still your children. Margaret nodded. I know. And we deserve something. Lily's eyes widened. Margaret remained calm. Why? Daniel stared at her. Because we're your children. Margaret smiled sadly. You remembered that very quickly. Daniel looked embarrassed. That's not what I meant. It is. No. You didn't remember I was your mother when I needed you. Daniel's face fell. But now that you know I'm worth $7 million, you suddenly remember. Nobody spoke. Margaret closed the folder. I called you here because I wanted to tell you the truth. She looked at all three. But I also wanted to make something clear. Michael leaned forward. What? You will not receive this money simply because you are my children. The room went still. Vanessa whispered, Then who will? Margaret looked at Lily. Lily immediately shook her head. Mom, don't. Margaret smiled. I haven't finished. She turned back to the others. Your father left instructions. Michael's expression changed. What instructions? Margaret slid the lawyer's document across the table. Read it. Michael picked it up. His eyes moved across the page. Then his face changed. Daniel grabbed it. He read. Vanessa leaned over his shoulder. They read the same sentence. The inheritance may be redirected entirely if the beneficiaries fail to demonstrate genuine care for Margaret during her lifetime. Daniel's hands began shaking. What is this? Your father's final instruction. Michael looked at Margaret. So you're testing us? No. Margaret shook her head. I'm not testing you. She looked at them with tears in her eyes. Life already did. Michael pushed the paper away. Mom, that's not fair. Margaret nodded. Maybe it isn't. You can't judge everything we've done based on a few months. Margaret's eyes filled. A few months? Her voice cracked. I spent 72 years loving you. She touched her chest. 72. Michael went silent. You had a lifetime of my love. She looked at Daniel. You had a lifetime of my sacrifices. Then Vanessa. You had a lifetime of my protection. Her voice trembled. And when I needed a few months from you. She shook her head. You couldn't give me that. Nobody could answer. Lily began crying. Margaret reached for her hand. I don't want this money to destroy what little family we have left. Michael looked at Lily. Did she know? Lily shook her head. I didn't know about the 7 million. Michael looked at Margaret. Are you giving it all to her? Margaret paused. Then she said, No. Michael's face briefly relaxed. Then Margaret continued. Because I don't want Lily to spend the rest of her life believing she owes me for caring for me. Lily looked at her mother. Then what are you going to do? Margaret took a deep breath. I've decided. She looked at her 3 older children. None of you will inherit the 7 million. The room exploded. What? Michael stood. Mom? Daniel stared at her. You can't do that. Vanessa began crying. Please. Margaret remained seated. I can. It's Dad's money. It is my inheritance. But we're his children, and I am his wife. Michael shook his head. This is unbelievable. Margaret's voice became firm. No. She pointed toward the door. What is unbelievable is that you could watch your mother become sick and lonely, while sitting on comfortable lives of your own. Silence. Then Margaret opened another folder. This is where the money will go. She placed the document on the table. The majority will be placed into a foundation. Daniel stared at it. A foundation? For elderly people who have been abandoned. Michael's face went pale. Margaret continued. People who need medicine. People who need food. People who have no family to care for them. She looked at her children. People like the woman I almost became. Lily covered her mouth. Vanessa began sobbing. Mom, please. Margaret looked at her. I forgive you. Vanessa looked up. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to give you my inheritance. Michael lowered himself back into his chair. Daniel stared at the floor. The $7 million they had imagined would change their lives had just disappeared. Not because Margaret was cruel. Not because she hated them, but because they had shown her exactly what they valued. And for the first time, they understood something they should have understood long ago. They hadn't lost $7 million that night. They had lost the opportunity to prove that they deserved it. After the meeting, the 3 older children left separately. Michael didn't say goodbye. Daniel hugged Margaret and cried. Vanessa stood at the doorway for several minutes. Then she whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. Margaret nodded. I know. Vanessa walked away. The door closed. Margaret sat quietly. Lily came beside her. Mom? Margaret looked at her. Yes? Are you okay? Margaret nodded. I'm sad. Why? Because I wanted my children to need me for me. She looked toward the closed door. Not for what I have. Lily wrapped her arms around her. Margaret held her tightly. And for the first time since Robert died, Margaret wasn't afraid of being alone anymore, because she finally understood something. Sometimes the person standing beside you with empty hands is worth more than the people standing around you waiting for an inheritance. And Lily had spent months proving that. She had nothing to offer her mother except her time, her effort, her love, and somehow that had been enough. The house was quiet after the 3 older children left. For the first time in months, Margaret felt as though she could finally breathe. Not because her children had apologized. Not because she had just revealed a $7 million inheritance, and certainly not because she had chosen to leave them nothing. She felt lighter because, after years of making excuses for them, she had finally stopped. Lily sat beside her on the sofa. For several minutes, neither woman spoke. Then Lily broke the silence. "Mom?" Margaret looked at her. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you sure? About what?" "About giving the money away." Margaret smiled. "You mean the $7 million? Lily nodded. "You could help yourself. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life." Margaret looked around the modest living room. Then she smiled. "Do you know what your father used to tell me?" "What?" "He used to say that money is only useful when it makes someone's life better." Lily smiled. "That sounds like Dad. He wasn't perfect," Margaret laughed softly, "but he had a good heart." She looked down at her hands. "When he died, I thought losing him was the worst thing that would ever happen to me." She paused. "I was wrong." Lily knew what she meant. "It hurt more when my own children stopped coming." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But I don't want to spend the rest of my life being angry." Lily reached for her hand. "You don't have to." Margaret squeezed it. "No," she smiled. "I want to spend it doing something good." The following morning, Margaret met with Mr. Harris, the family lawyer. Lily went with her. The documents were spread across a large table. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. "As we discussed, Mrs. Williams, the $7 million can be structured exactly according to your wishes." Margaret nodded. "I want Lily taken care of first." Lily immediately interrupted. "Mom, let me finish." Margaret looked at the lawyer. "I want enough money placed in an education trust to pay for Lily's remaining education." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "And after that? I want her to have a home." "Mom, a modest home," Margaret continued. "Nothing extravagant." Lily shook her head. "You don't have to do this." "I know," Margaret smiled. "That's why I'm doing it." Mr. Harris smiled. "There will still be a substantial amount remaining." Margaret nodded. "That's for the foundation. What would you like to call it?" Margaret looked at Lily, then toward the window. "Robert and Margaret Williams Foundation." Lily smiled through her tears. "I love that." Margaret nodded. "It will provide medical assistance, food, temporary housing and companionship for elderly people who have been abandoned by their families." Mr. Harris wrote it down. "That's a very meaningful purpose." Margaret looked at him. "I know what it feels like to have everything except someone to call." She paused. "I don't want another old woman to feel that way." But Margaret wasn't finished with her children. She wanted to see them one last time. Not to give them money, not to change her decision. She simply wanted to say something she had never been able to say. 3 days later, she invited them back. This time, nobody came with gifts. Nobody brought flowers. Nobody mentioned the inheritance. Michael arrived first, then Daniel, finally Vanessa. They sat across from their mother. Margaret looked at each of them. "I didn't ask you here to discuss money." Michael looked down. "We understand. I want to talk about something more important." Daniel nodded. Margaret took a breath. "I forgive you." Vanessa began crying immediately. "Mom!" "No." Margaret gently raised her hand. "Let me finish." She looked at them. "I forgive you for the times you didn't answer." Michael's eyes filled. "I forgive you for refusing to let me stay with you." Daniel wiped his face. "I forgive you for the times you made me feel like I was a burden." Vanessa covered her mouth. "I forgive you for making me feel like I had to beg my own children for attention." Nobody spoke. Margaret's voice became softer. "But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened." Michael nodded. "We know. Do you?" He looked at her. "Yes." Margaret studied him. "Then remember this." She pointed gently toward the three of them. "One day, if you're lucky, you will grow old." They listened. "Your businesses won't sit beside you. Your houses won't hold your hands. Your cars won't take care of you when you're sick. And your money won't tell you that everything will be okay." Her voice cracked. "People will." She looked at Lily. "People are what matter." Michael began crying. "I was selfish." Margaret said nothing. "I kept telling myself I was working for my family." He wiped his face. "But I forgot that you were my family." Margaret nodded. Daniel spoke next. "I thought because I sent money sometimes, I was doing enough. Margaret looked at him. Money isn't the same as presence. I know that now. Vanessa's voice trembled. I was embarrassed. Margaret frowned. Embarrassed? I didn't know how to handle having a sick mother in my house. I was worried about what people would think. Margaret stared at her daughter. You were worried about people. Vanessa nodded. And I was worried about dying alone. Vanessa broke down. I'm sorry. Margaret stood slowly. She walked toward her daughter. Then she hugged her. Vanessa cried against her mother's shoulder. I'm sorry, Mom. Margaret closed her eyes. I know. But there was one thing Margaret wanted them to understand. The money is gone. Michael looked up. Margaret continued. Not gone in the way you think. She explained the foundation. She explained Lily's education. She explained the home she would receive. And she explained that the remaining money would be used to help elderly people who had nobody. Daniel listened quietly. Then he asked, How much are we getting? The room went silent. Margaret looked at him. Nothing. Daniel lowered his head. I understand. And surprisingly, this time, he didn't argue. Michael didn't argue either. Neither did Vanessa. Perhaps they had finally understood. Months passed. Lily graduated from school. Margaret was there. She sat in the front row, holding a bouquet of flowers. When Lily walked across the stage, Margaret stood and applauded louder than anyone else. Lily searched through the crowd. When she saw her mother, she smiled. That smile was worth more than $7 million. After the ceremony, Lily ran to Margaret. I did it. Margaret hugged her. Yes, you did. You helped me. No. Margaret kissed her forehead. You helped yourself, but you believed in me. That's what mothers do. Lily smiled. And what do daughters do? Margaret laughed. They stay. Lily hugged her again. Always. A year later, the Robert and Margaret Williams Foundation opened its first elderly care center. There were rooms for people who had nowhere to go, a small medical clinic, a kitchen, a garden, and a large common room where elderly men and women could sit together instead of spending their final years alone. Margaret stood outside the building on opening day. She looked at the sign, Robert and Margaret Williams Foundation. Lily stood beside her. Are you happy? Margaret smiled. I am. You miss Dad? Every day. Lily held her hand. I think he'd be proud. Margaret looked toward the building. I hope so. Then she saw an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench. Margaret walked over. Hello. The woman looked up. Hello. What's your name? Ruth. Margaret smiled. Would you like some company? Ruth smiled. I would. Margaret sat beside her, and for the next hour they talked. Not about money, not about children, not about inheritance, just life. Years later, Margaret would sometimes receive letters from her older children. Michael eventually sold one of his businesses and began volunteering at the foundation. Daniel started bringing meals from his restaurants to elderly residents. Vanessa became a regular visitor. None of them received a single dollar from Margaret's inheritance, but they received something else, a second chance. Not to reclaim the money, but to reclaim the relationship they had nearly destroyed. And Margaret never changed her decision. The $7 million remained dedicated to the purpose she had chosen, because she had learned something painful. Sometimes giving someone everything doesn't make them love you. Sometimes losing everything is what finally teaches them what they had. One evening, many years later, Margaret sat on her porch beside Lily. The sun was setting. Lily rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Mom? Yes? Do you ever regret not giving them the money? Margaret thought for a moment. No. Not even once? No. She smiled. If I had given them the money, they might have remembered the inheritance. She looked at Lily. But by giving it away, I hope they remembered their mother. Lily smiled. And did they? Margaret looked toward the horizon. I think so. She took Lily's hand. But that's not the lesson. What is? Margaret smiled. The lesson is that love should never be measured by what someone can give you. She squeezed her daughter's hand. Sometimes, the person who has the least is the one who gives you the most. Lily leaned against her, and Margaret closed her eyes. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't thinking about the children who had left. She was thinking about the daughter who stayed, The daughter who had nothing. No money, no successful business, no luxurious home, no wealthy husband. Just a tired heart and two hands willing to work. And somehow, those two hands had given Margaret everything she had needed. Not $7 million. Not comfort, not luxury. Something far more valuable. Presence. Because when Margaret was sick, Lily stayed. When Margaret was afraid, Lily stayed. When everyone else was too busy, Lily stayed. And in the end, that was the inheritance Margaret valued most. Not the $7 million her husband had left behind, but the love her youngest daughter had given her when she had nothing to gain. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. You can inherit millions and still be poor if you have no one beside you when you need them most. But if someone stays beside you when you have nothing to offer, you are already rich. If this story touched your heart, or if you can relate to Margaret's story in any way, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, if you were in Margaret's position, would you have done the same thing with the $7 million inheritance? I'd love to hear what you think.